Okay. Hello everybody and welcome to the War Room. This one is for this weekend's UFC main event, Whittaker v Gastelum. Okay. So obviously, Robert Whittaker, former champion, looks like he's probably on his way back to a title. I mean, you know, he's put a nice win streak together since he's lost to Adesanya. Took a bit of time off, beat Darren Till by unanimous decision, looked great against both him and Jared Cannonier. Now lined up to face Gastelum, who's had a little bit of a rough run of late, losing to Adesanya, then losing a split decision to Till, which obviously was a very competitive fight, and then getting heel hooked by Jack Hermansson, which was a bit of a surprise to some because, you know, Gastelum is normally quite difficult, A, to take down and B, to submit. His last fight against Ian Heinisch, though, showed a lot of improvements, a lot of takedowns, grappling, which I would discuss briefly in a second. So how do these two guys match up? Well, Gastelum obviously is a southpaw. He's got like a lazy counterboxing style, stands heavy on his rear leg. He's quite flat-footed, but he does tend to bounce in and out a little bit if he feels the fight's getting flat and he's trying to tempt his opponent to do something. You know, you'll maybe see him kind of get a bit high on his toes and bounce in and out to try and draw their attack, and then he can start, you know, that counter right hook that he's got. Obviously got a beautiful left hand as well that we've seen. And one of the beautiful things about him weighing heavy on his rear leg and being quite flat-footed is that it allows his upper body a lot more movement than it would, you know, if he had a shorter stance or he was weighed heavy on his lead leg. Like, it allows him to drift away. So, you know, you think back to the Michael Bisping fight, he teased the counter from Michael Bisping and then countered the counter, drifted out of the way, touched him with the lead hand, and followed through with the rear. And that management of range is very much something that you develop over rounds and rounds of boxing, sparring, and you know, training with other guys, you know, guys that are looking after you but working well with you and testing those ranges. He's got a very classical boxing style, and I think it suits MMA very well, particularly with his stature in this weight class, because being 5'9", you know, he doesn't want to be too far out of range because, you know, then he's dealing with guys like Adesanya on the outside who are picking him off at a distance. He's got to try and coax them to come into range. So that, like, heavy on the rear leg, lazy boxing style, flat-footed, makes him look a bit more vulnerable than he perhaps is. So then when people do move forward, then they're meeting some fire. The other thing as well is, you know, it gives more stability with takedowns, which is part of the reason why his takedown defense is so good. He's 64%, but I mean, it's very rare that you see him taken down and controlled for very long. You know, he's good at scrambling back to his feet. He had a bit of struggle against Ian Heinisch, but predominantly was in control of that fight because of his wrestling and the improvements that he'd made. On the flip side, Whittaker is a heavy front foot fighter. Kind of leads with his head, so he tries to like bait them to throw and then counters them. Very quick off the mark, covers distance very well. Stands heavy on his lead leg partly because he stands a bit further out of range than he appears to his opponents. Oftentimes he'll look closer than he actually is because he's heavy on his lead leg. But that, similar to Gastelum, it allows him to slip a decent distance back to get himself out of danger, and has also got good counter hooks. Obviously, he's orthodox, so he's countering with his left hook. He's a bit more lively on his feet, even when he's stationary. His heels are still off the floor, and he's still, you know, there's still mobility there. You can still see he looks a bit like a sprinter sometimes, like he's about ready to take off. And that allows him to fire his high kicks up, you know, right into the guard or the sides of the head. It's one of the strengths of his style. He doesn't turn his hips over a great deal. He snaps the high kick up and brings it back, which, you know, from a traditional martial arts perspective, if you're doing taekwondo, or, you know, karate, that's a beautiful point scoring style of head kick. And what he's proven with the stoppage that he's had, obviously with the, you know, Jacare and Brunson, is that you don't need a lot of power to knock somebody out with a head kick, as long as it's well timed and placed, especially to make somebody vulnerable for whatever comes next. And the other thing that comes to mind as well is when he fought Brad Tavares, he threw that beautiful front kick that didn't land, pulled it back straight into a lead hook. Kicks can set up punches. They're good for closing range. And I think if he's just on the outside of Gastelum's range, he might be able to use that speed to his advantage. And he's got a really good gazelle hook, like a hop-in hook. He jumps in and catches people on the chin with it, like he did against Brad Tavares. But what's interesting is he doesn't turn his shoulders, much like his high kicks. He doesn't turn his hip over, which allows him to retract it quite quickly. It makes him very good defensively. Not so much against Israel Adesanya, but he just didn't look himself in that fight. And since he's taken some time off, he's and got a wake up first round against Darren Till with the elbow. I think he's I think he's starting to find himself again. It's almost like he's got a second lease of life. And I think maybe the Heinisch performance for Gastelum was something similar. He looked very good, and obviously being able to lean on that wrestling background, which looked to me to have been refined, in the training camp for that fight, might give him a second option in this fight. Okay. So, Gastelum slipping and countering. I've mentioned that. He's never been stopped either. He's been knocked down. He's been hurt. He got beat up pretty good against Adesanya and was nearly stopped at the end of that fight. However, his toughness is always something that shines through in his fights when it's needed. He doesn't go out there with his face on a platter, ready to get punched in every time. He's a smart dude, still a good looking dude, even though he's had a bunch of fights. He doesn't take unnecessary risks. But if there is a situation where he does get caught with a shot, he always wears it well. And I think that's going to be something he's going to have to keep in mind for Whittaker, because I do think Whittaker, even though he'll be the naturally bigger man in there, I do think he'll have a speed advantage. I think Whittaker is more springy, more plyometric than Gastelum. I think Gastelum's strong and stable, and when he hits, I bet it thuds. But I don't think he's got the same kind of elasticity as Rob Whittaker. So it's much more about him kind of hanging back, waiting for those counters. The right hook, as I've talked about, is excellent. Slipping back, countering with the straight left is another real strength of his. Something else that he landed in the Ian Heinisch fight was a clean body kick as well. And given the fact that these guys are open stances, so it's southpaw v orthodox, that body kick is there. And unfortunately for Whittaker, you're far more vulnerable on this side of your body due to certain organs that are available for kicking. The liver shot, as Bas Rutten would say. So Gastelum's got a good opportunity to target the liver shot of Whittaker and, hurt him, slow him down. And because Whittaker stands kind of square, it opens up the possibility for Gastelum to throw straight kicks as well as body kicks, like turning kicks. Something else he can consider. And again, Whittaker heavy on the lead leg. So inside low kicks, body kicks, all very valuable for Gastelum. As far as Gastelum's improved wrestling, he got 6 of 14 takedowns against Ian Heinisch. That was control of nearly 7 minutes, 6 minutes 50. I think that is going to be a very valuable confidence booster for him, but something we have to bear in mind is that this is a 5-round fight, and although Gastelum has got great conditioning overall, I mean, both of these guys have, invest in that conditioning in wrestling, and for it to not get anywhere, especially with a sharpshooter like Whittaker, who might have been really improving his jiu-jitsu. I know he's had the gi on quite a lot recently. So it might be a roll of the dice for Gastelum. Might be a smart thing for him to do if Whittaker is travelling forward at speed, to quick level change underneath, or, maybe that Stipe Miocic snatch single, which would be right there again. Orthodox fighter stepping in at speed. Gastelum be able to level change and grab that, yank it up, and maybe run the pipe and put him on his back. It's something to think about, certainly, for Gastelum. 6 of 14 takedowns doesn't sound great, but 14 takedowns was by far and a long way the most he's shot in a fight. I think he had 9 against Adesanya and maybe 1 landed. But landing 6 against Heinisch, who's a big, strong, physical individual, definitely a more natural middleweight. I think it bodes well for him. The one thing we have to bear in mind again about this being a 5-round fight is that Gastelum's had 2 5-rounders. He's lost both of them. Whittaker's had 3 5-round fights in the UFC and won all of them. He lost a 5-round fight before he signed with the UFC, but he was but a boy then. So I can kind of write that one off as a learning experience. To have 5-round fights before you get to the UFC is often shows you're contending at a high level, at least locally. So Whittaker definitely has the experience into the championship rounds and has been there recently. So I certainly think that leans the favor in his direction the deeper the fight goes. But then if it ends up standing up the whole time, it's kind of a coin toss. You've got Whittaker manipulating range, bouncing in and out, and using more snappy point scoring, power punching point scoring. Don't get me wrong, but the style of the delivery is much more point scoring, snap hook, long shots where he's coming in kind of ridge hands and then all the kicks that he throws. You go back and watch the Jacare fight, you'll see what I mean. The leg comes up, the knee locks out, and then the lower leg extends out. It's not like a Thai kick where you drag the whole leg around. But very effective, especially at catching people on the ends of his range when they're not expecting a kick. So I certainly think that Whittaker's going to be problems if Gastelum isn't able to close range. He might find himself peppered and picked off, in the early rounds. But at some point, I think Whittaker will close distance, and that's where Gastelum's counter-punching comes into play. And with Gastelum casually pressuring with his laid-back boxing style, Whittaker's probably going to want to test that anyway and see if he can land something. So there will be opportunities opening up. I expect this to be a very competitive fight. I do see Whittaker having the edge at the moment. I don't know whether Gastelum maybe peaked around the Adesanya fight and he's just not quite looked the same since. And, obviously he's coming off a win, but Ian Heinisch is number 15 and Gastelum's top of the food chain, really. So we'll see. We'll see if Whittaker's got a second wind and he's on his way back to a title, or whether Gastelum's still got some in the tank to be a top 5 fighter. Just quick looking at the stats. I mean, very little as far as the grappling goes. The thing that stands out is Rob Whittaker, 84% takedown offense. And that was, 28 attempts from Yoel Romero. You've got to think that, his takedown offense is not only it's a high stat, but it's a tested high stat as well. More tested than a lot of other guys in the division, in the sport perhaps. Takedown accuracy, 27%, but he's not really that interested in scoring takedowns. But Gastelum has pushed his up with that last fight against Heinisch. Is it now at 39%? Takedown average slightly higher for Gastelum as well, which again would have been influenced by that last fight. But the striking stats is the most important thing. Striking accuracy, it's much of a muchness. What you see here is Whittaker having a slightly higher strike output, but a slightly lower striking accuracy, which tells me that oftentimes he's throwing strikes to set up others, whereas Gastelum, being a counter-puncher, is a bit more economical. He throws a few less strikes and has a slightly higher striking accuracy, and their striking defense is, very, very similar. I expect this to be an absolute barn burner, and both quite got short reaches as well, 73 and 71 inches. But as I said, Whittaker is the taller and longer range fighter, and will make the most of being on the outside and utilizing that extra bit of reach and height that he's got. All right, I think it's going to be a great fight. I hope you enjoy it. I hope this has made sense, and I'll catch you next time.